Considering making a bold move, one that might get you into trouble? If so, stay with me, and it may help you to discern whether to move forward with that bold move. I'm Lynmarie. I often focus on the work of the Holy Spirit, especially connected with the prophetic. Today, I'm building on yesterday's post and making the case that calculated risk-taking is the way to go when inspired by God. Let's dive right in. What do I mean by calculated risk-taking, and how do I know when it's inspired? Let's get to that. To help bring a clear picture of what this looks like, I'm using the signers of the Declaration of Independence as an illustration. And yesterday, I provided some very brief but interesting background on these founders. So if you haven't watched it yet, skip back to the independence story and then come back. Now, I don't know of any prophetic dreams these signers had, but when I use the term dreamers in the title of this post, I'm not just speaking of prophetic dreamers. I'm also including dreamers who hold dreams for the future in their hearts and aspire to their coming true. Good things often come to those who do that, dream, especially when they're persistent. And the same goes for those who act on prophetic dreams, bravely taking the action inspired by the dreams. As I said yesterday, the signers of the Declaration of Independence, well, their inspiration primarily came from knowledge and experience with government, paired with God-given reasoning and providential faith. So these signers were aware of which government structures had failed in the past and why. It was their knowledge, experience, God-given reasoning, and faith that inspired them. In fact, the inspiration to gather and write the Declaration of Independence was so strong that they not only penned words that changed the world, but stood firmly and unwaveringly on those words, treating the document and what it stated as sacred. You might say it was inspiration moved to a higher level, motivated inspiration, which leads to risk-taking, today's focus. Look at what they were willing to risk. The last line of the Declaration, just above the signatures, shouts this loudly, quote, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." All 56 signed this proclamation. So let's talk risk-taking a second. They risked everything, their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor by signing on that July 4th. This is something our lawmakers should always do. Risk everything for their country, regardless of the potential consequences, whether it be rejection, election loss, bankruptcy, groundless persecution, or even incarceration. Be brave, do good, as Michelle Tafoya says on her podcast. If you don't know her, she was an NFL sideline commentator for years until she moved in a different direction. In other words, fearlessly do what's right and let the chips fall where they may. Of course, trust in God with a capital T is helpful. And our founders spelled out very clearly whom they owed their obedience to and to whom their ultimate trust was laid, acknowledging the reality and authority of God more than once on the parchment. And that takes me to the inspiration part. When we know beyond a doubt that the Holy Spirit has spoken to us with the intention of inspiring us to take a particular action, we should not only be moved, but also be highly motivated and uncompromising, just as these signers were, inspired and calculated risk takers. But beyond being inspired, meaning called or God directed, what do I mean by calculated? Let me draw on this example again. Without question, what lay ahead for the colonists was war. Yet they had virtually no chance of achieving victory. The odds against them were exponential. In human terms, the idea of fighting the British Army was preposterous. So in their minds, they had to weigh the risk of going to war against the greatest world empire at the time. They had to calculate exactly how good was this idea. Sound familiar? You feel you've been called to take a certain action, maybe due to prophetic dreams or words, or maybe through a conviction or knowing. But taking that action just seems too risky. Time to calculate, as the founders did. They had to do the math. Ever dreamed you were in a math class? By the way, registering for a math class, getting a math textbook, or attending a math class in God-given dreams, that means there's something you need to figure out. And if it's algebra, figuring it out might be challenging. But the Holy Spirit is there to help, so get on with it. The founding fathers figured it out. They calculated the risk and saw a green light. So the calculation for the signers of the Declaration came down to answering this one question. Was this inspired by God? And that's always the question. For many of the colonists, that their cause was just and biblically supported was enough to give them assurance that God would favor and help them in their noble fight. They felt in their spirits that establishing a new nation based on the concept that men are endowed by their Creator with certain permanent rights, and that governments should exist to protect these rights, was the right thing to do. There are many ways we feel assurance that we've truly been inspired, and each of us has to discern this for ourselves in each different circumstance. But when confident, the calculation is clear. If you're confident that you are called by God to an action or endeavor, then the risk is zero, no matter what others think, no matter what the odds are. Look to the book of Numbers. Remember when the spies returned from the land of Canaan with a grim report that they were as grasshoppers to the Canaanites? And remember how Joshua and Caleb stepped forward saying, "If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us. Do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land. Their protection is removed from them. And the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." Why do you suppose those two urged so boldly? One answer might be found at the beginning of the account. God had already told Moses they would win. Numbers 13, 1 and 2, quote, "The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 'Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel,'" unquote. If Moses had shared that with Joshua and Caleb, and we don't know whether he did or didn't, but if he had, they would have known that the mission was inspired. Here's what many believers don't grasp: that by God's grace, we are sometimes informed in advance of what he has for us or what he wants us to do. And in those cases, inspired and calculated risk-taking is a dreamer's best friend. When you know God has sent you, when you feel in your bones or have heard it in your ears, then there's no risk. Maybe it's you against the world, or you against your world. But I'm urging you to take the risk when it's called for. Michelle Tafoya says, "Be brave, do good." And I'll add, Be blessed and live beyond your wildest dreams.